Well, hey everybody. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome to our gathering tonight here with St. Stephen's University. These Prophetic Imaginations gathering. I know we have a handful of people still popping through the waiting room, but we'll get started. So I just wanted to first say thank you for being here. Excited to have you. My name is Steve Schallert, for those who don't know me. I currently work as the SSU coordinator for recruitment and marketing, and we're excited to have some space tonight to have this beautiful conversation around Unlearning Dominion. And yeah, I just eager to step into this place with all of you to have what I know will be a meaningful dialogue with some really good friends and some beautiful people. As a community at SSU, we kind of have these core values and convictions around justice, beauty, and compassion. And one of the things, as we think about this theme that we're stepping into tonight around unlearning dominion, and the realization that if we want to do justice beautifully and to do so compassionately, that there has to be a process by which we both internally and communally begin to think through the ways in which domination and the instinct of dominating, or the way that culture, theology, politics has been infiltrated and influenced by the nature of domination, affects our way of being in the world and relating to others. And so I'm excited for this time together that we'll share. Our hope going forward also is that as an institution, we'll have more opportunities for people to come and share time together and hear from some of our beautiful student body, as well as alumni and professors and friends. The chat thread, I guess is the right word. The chat thread is open for everybody who's jumping in from all over, whether it's morning or afternoon or evening. I'm here in Cape Town, South Africa. It's evening here. Feel free to drop a note and let us know who you are and where you're joining us from. And just so you know kind of the flow of this evening, in just a little bit, I'm going to hand it over to SSU's residency poet, Eric Janzen, who is also a MA student in Peace and Justice through the Jim Force Institute, and he'll open us in a reflective poem. And then we'll spend our time we have 4 really incredible contributors this evening: Chris Horton, Annie Abernathy, Susanna Wagner, and Joey Ager, who are all going to be unpacking and just giving us some insight on this question around how we unlearn dominion in various pockets and ways that affect we think through our lives or our theologies or our communities, or our relation ecologically. And so we'll have these kind of 4 short reflections together. And after those 4 reflections, we'll take a quick break. And after we have our break, we'll come back together and let our 4 panelists share some time in conversation with each other. And then towards the end, we'll have some room for Q&R. So I'll also add that as the next hour goes, feel free, if there's questions that are forming, to drop them in the chat as well. And I'll try to keep track of them. And we can also just have some kind of public collective dialogue towards the end of this time. So again, on behalf of SSU, just want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for being with us. And I hope that this is as meaningful to all of you as as the organizing process has been for me and for us. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it to Eric to kind of invite us into this time together.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. Okay. Deep breath. Before the long shadow, when living trees once crowned the wide and sacred horizon, when clear rivers bordered fields of tall golden grass, where the hands of Adam sowed life in life-giving soil, when Eve danced with lions, where lamb sat with leopard, we did not walk as ruthless kings. We did not rule as bitter queens. Even wandering in the arid paths of this burnt and broken land, we are intertwined. Like long coiling knots of vines, our thorns are not eternal. Yet in the dark valley, withering cities sprawl. Wolves roam and howl, empire's dissonant song. They hunt the scent of power. Ascending 7 hills, they circle and claw at the moon. They can only fail. They can only rage in exhaustion. This is when the hunt cuts them and bleeds the others. And all the earth suffers. There is a dawn, a sunlit moment that speaks. Oh, stand in deep silence. Bend your swords until they break. Bow your heads and listen. Do not choke the world. Adam, Eve, tend this garden. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Eric. Beautiful, powerful, mate. I'm just going to give us about 10, 15 seconds just to kind of feel that in ourselves for a minute. And as we feel through that, afterwards, I'm going to hand it over to Chris Horton to be our first presenter for the evening. So let's just take about 15 seconds collectively, wherever you happen to find yourself. Yeah, and just receive that. I thank you, Eric, again. Appreciate you, friend. All right, I'm going to hand it to Chris Horton, who's going to be our first presenter for the evening. Chris is a master's student in peace and justice in the Palestinian context. And we just invite you to be with us this evening. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you for the privilege of sharing with you. I'm going to be sharing a few thoughts on unlearning dominion in the church context. And just to help me do that, and so that you don't have to look at my face all the time, I'm going to share screen and just show you a few slides. So Jesus loves the church. Paul wrote that in Ephesians 5 when he described Jesus as the perfect husband for the bride. Jesus loves the church, but can we? So many people don't. And for all kinds of reasons. It's nearly 60 years since Bob Dylan called the church Desolation Row. And that song still rings true. Some are disillusioned with pastors. There have been plenty of failures, some of them very high profile. Or just the hypocrisy that seems to show in so many contexts. Some are hurt by people in church. Some see church just as a money-making or power-grabbing institution that even abuses people. So I want to ask the question, what do we mean by church? Because maybe we have a wrong picture of church if what we see is an organization or a context for a large number of people to be told what to think by a few dogmatic so-called experts. So what did Jesus mean by church? He only used the word twice recorded in the Gospels. And I'm going to focus on Matthew 18, because I believe in Matthew 18, he actually gives us a definition. They've been talking about, how many times do I have to forgive? How do we sort out relationship issues? Plenty of those in churches. So Jesus teaches, talk to the person direct. Try and win your brother or sister over. And if that fails, take a friend who can help you listen to one another well without taking sides. And if all else fails, take it to the church. Now, what did he mean? He was talking to a ragbag bunch of people whose only connection with each other was that they were connected with Jesus. And I think that gives us a clue. We're not talking about an institution or an organization. We're talking about people joined by the Holy Spirit. And then Jesus says something really interesting. He says, wherever 2 or 3 are being gathered into my name or my character. Now, that doesn't sound very good in English, but it's a very literal translation of how it comes out in Greek. Where 2 or 3 are being gathered. It's the Holy Spirit doing the gathering and gathering people around Jesus. Jesus-centered discipleship. Where 2 or 3 are being gathered into my name or character. It's not just in, it's actually into. There's a dynamic movement here. It isn't once for all. It's a process. As we follow Jesus, as we become more like him, we find that we're joined more closely with those that he's planted us with. So, church might look like a group of 4 or 5 people gathering over a meal to pray and share. It might look like a larger group. It might have some structures to it. But what really matters, what makes it church, is where a few people are being gathered into my name, into my character. There I am in the midst. I think there's the definition. It's the presence of the living God that defines church, not what it looks like, not its structure, not the organization, not the charity or non-profit status, not the money, nothing of that. It's only genuinely church if people are being gathered together into Jesus' name and his presence is there with us. Great definition, but can it really be that simple? Can we keep church simple? Now, I was blessed as a teenager that my first experience of fellowship wasn't actually in a church. It was in an interdenominational Christian youth group. And through that, I was exposed to a number of churches through a group of people enjoying charismatic renewal. We're talking the 1970s now, so this is before most of you were born. But a number of people from all kinds of backgrounds. And what I kept discovering was that the things that really matter are dead simple: love, unity, humility, doing and putting into practice what God says. It seemed so simple. And yet so many churches seemed so complex and compromised by behaving just like any other organization, even like multinational oil companies that pollute while claiming to be green. So as a student, I found a spiritual home amongst some people who are part of the house church movement in the UK. We wanted to keep it simple, experimental, without structure, to be open to the Holy Spirit, free from religion. It was exciting. And it went well for a few years. But it became unhealthy, this little church, probably more unhealthy than most of the institutional churches I'd been part of or had visited. There was no structure to restrain the way one person came to dominate discussions, and we became isolated as a small group, declining in number, but proudly believing we were being more faithful than the other churches. No love shared outside the group, no unity or even connection with the wider body of Jesus' followers, no humility, just confusion over what Jesus was actually commanding us to do. In summary, trying to keep it simple isn't easy, and alone is not the answer. We'd reacted against some of the bad stuff we saw in institutional churches, but found the attitudes in us created the same problems. Changing the style and pattern doesn't change hearts. My wife Catherine and I had to recognize that we'd contributed to this church becoming a context for harm rather than wholeness. We'd been part of the inward-looking journey, which resulted in a simple home church becoming isolated and arrogant. And because it was a context where we'd all invested so much of ourselves, as well as time and money, it became painful when we had different ideas about how to move forward. So I hope that some of the things that we learnt then will be of help to others now. First, we brought in help from outside. The Holy Spirit connected us with some wise, godly people who listened well and prayed with us. It's quite a story how we came across them. They brought some good advice on how to handle the situation. Second, we had to repent of our own part in being proud and arrogant. And we had to choose to forgive the people we felt had hurt us. Now, that's a big one, but Jesus was ever so clear in Matthew 6. If you don't forgive others, neither will your Father forgive you. It's not that God doesn't want to forgive, but if we refuse forgiveness to others, we take ourselves out of his blessing and forgiveness. And then we ask God to heal the hurt, and he did. Our healing happened over time, and a large part of it came from spending time sharing meals and praying with people in the healthy church we then joined. We found people with whom we could build an open and trusting friendship based on mutuality. So when we and some others from that group decided to join healthier churches, not perfect, but healthier, then the group that had become isolated just ceased to meet. But that itself caused great hurt to those who wanted the group to continue. So it was a painful season. But some 20 years later, we had the opportunity to start rebuilding relationships with the key people with whom fellowship had been broken. You see, God is committed to peacemaking and reconciliation, and 20 years is nothing. So, does it always have to be messy? Maybe. But the New Testament writers seem to have a vision of church becoming something glorious. And in Revelation 7, we have a wonderful picture of the church made up of people from every tribe and language, every people group. I think there'll be some surprising people and some surprising expressions of church there. It takes supernatural love, not just our best efforts, to see these sorts of changes. And Paul's prayer in Ephesians 3:14-19 is both wonderful and revealing. The missing verse, for those of you who spotted there's a blank, is verse 18 and 19. He emphasizes that it's only possible together with all the saints. We can't hide away in our hurt, separate from others, like Simon and Garfunkel sang in I'm a Rock, I'm an Island, another song from before many of you were born. If we want to experience God's love, we have to take the risk of being in community, building relationships that are mutual and based on grace, not compulsion. So whatever it looks like, we do have to keep it simple, but let's keep it real, open to challenge, open to others. And that's the kind of community I want to be part of. Thank you. So I'll hand back to Steve at this point.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate your thoughts. Appreciate your invitation there to Yeah, the costly space of communal dynamics. I know I can relate a lot to different communal experiments and how yeah how beautifully painful and messy all that can often be, and the ways in which I think yeah I don't know anyway I'm not talking, so I'll stop talking. All right, I'm going to hand it to Annie Abernathy to invite us into a second reflection. Just a reminder, also, you're welcome at any point in time if there's questions that pop up or thoughts that pop up to add them to the chat as we go. But I'll hand it to Annie. So Annie, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. That was thought-provoking. I have a lot of thoughts on Matthew 18 that I can't wait to share with you and back and forth. So we're talking about unlearning dominion, and I recently graduated from SSU with my master's in theology and culture. So I had the privilege and pleasure of writing my thesis, and thank God that's over. But it was often touched on this topic. In my research, it was more about authority within the church structure, who decides who gets to do what, and primarily about the ways that the church has been abusive to women because of a misunderstanding of God's rules, if you will, around authority. So I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I think dominion really kind of plays into it. And I'm going to get to that, but first I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself that will seem like it doesn't fit, but you'll get used to it. I grew up in a garden, kind of like Adam and Eve, as we were talking about earlier. Eric, your poem was just spot on. I grew up in the tropics, and we lived on a compound that was really a tropical paradise. And we had many, many different fruit trees and vines. And one of the things one of my brothers and I like to do is to try and list all of the fruits that we had. So I had a real love of these fruit trees. I would climb up and grab stuff. And most of the time, the fruit that I enjoyed was unripe. And here is an example of one. This is a mango. Probably most of you have seen these when they're yellow and really juicy. Well, I prefer them like this. And I dip it in a little bit of rock salt. I'm not going to eat it in front of you. I used to love guavas and santols, all these fruits, and I always wanted them unripe because they tasted different. They were a little sour and a little bitter. Well, truth is, probably it was about my impatience more than the taste. Also, the fact that the adults didn't want us to pick this fruit when it was unripe. They wanted us to let it ripen so they could enjoy it. We had other ideas. So I moved here to the States when I was almost 15 and encountered American fruit. And I have to tell you, I was very disappointed. American fruit is usually picked before it's ripe, which would have been okay if I could have eaten it right away. But it's put on a shelf in a grocery store in some climate-controlled area, and sometimes they'll put wax on it, or they'll change the color by adding who knows what. And this fruit is forced to ripen without the context of its home, of its natural environment, of the roots and everything else. And in some ways, you know, Americans are impatient. They want their fruit now, but they also want it to be ripe. So we have that in common a little bit, this impatience. I prefer it unripe. Americans prefer it ripe. So I've been thinking about the Garden of Eden, and This might seem like a stretch to you all, but hopefully if I talk long enough, it'll make sense, or we'll just have fun. But I wonder if the fruit on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what if it wasn't ripe? And that was the problem when Adam and Eve partook of it. Now, what does this have to do with dominion? I think if we are honest and we look at most of Western culture, we recognize that the Jewish creation myth has influenced most of Western society in the way we form governments, in the way we talk about relationships. We talk about God having dominion. You know, Ruach was the spirit that was hovering over the deep and the waters, and the deep waters and the earth, and unformed. And she spoke life into everything that was there. Also, we read that God then handed over that dominion to humankind to rule and garden, tend the garden, tend the animals. So we have the sense that there is authority and dominion that is appropriate, maybe God ordained. But here's the thing. I think we have never gotten it right ever since that moment in the garden. Whether you believe it's a real event or not, it's a great story of humankind's impatience to have something that wasn't ready or they weren't ready for. And I think this is just my thought, and I'm influenced a little bit by Henry Wink. I don't know if any of you have read his stuff about the powers. But I wonder if the devil's intervention in the garden wasn't a way of saying to humankind, this dominion that God has given you, it's not enough. What you really want is domination. So you need to press for that. You need to push and go get what you want. And I think theoretically, in the spiritual world, perhaps what happened in that moment was we lost our ability to have dominion in healthy ways over our lives, over nature. And we took on a more devilish understanding and the twisted understanding, which is domination. So what do we do? Now that we are in this predicament, we no longer know what dominion means. All we have in our beings, in our history, in our memory, is an understanding of domination. We have to unlearn that. So how do we unlearn something that seems so much a core of who we are? And I think from a Christian perspective, we can look at the life of Jesus and find some clues. There are many passages that I have found over the last few weeks on this that I could go into, but I'm just going to touch briefly on two in Luke. In Luke 4, at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, before he starts his ministry, he goes out into the desert where he is tempted by the devil. This sounds very similar to the garden experience, except obviously less fruit. But Jesus there was even tempted by Satan to give up what was rightfully his dominion, his authority. And Satan says something very interesting. He says to Jesus, as he shows him all the kingdoms of the world, I will give you the glory of these kingdoms and authority over them, because they are mine to give to anyone I please. I will give it all to you if you will worship me. Now, we can discuss whether or not we think Satan was telling the truth in that moment, but he is called the prince of the power of the air in Ephesians. So I think something really essential happened in the garden around this dominion, around this authority, and we are reaping the benefits not benefits. We're reaping the repercussions ever since. So Jesus has this encounter with Satan, and then immediately after that, he is in a synagogue and he breaks open Isaiah and he reads the text, which you all probably know. And he says, here's why I've come. I've come to, I'm paraphrasing, I've come to heal the brokenhearted. I've come to bring joy instead of weeping. I've come to heal the blind and the lame. I have come to release the captives and the prisoners. This is Jesus' definition of what dominion looks like. This is totally different from what we've been taught and what we've learned and sort of embodied all our lives, the need to have control over. And as Jesus talks about it, the way the Gentiles do, which is lording it over. So there are, if you take just Ephesians itself and go through each chapter and think about this concept of how does Jesus show his proper dominion, you will see it traced all the way through Ephesians. You'll also see it in the Beatitudes. You'll see how Jesus talks about meekness as being what gains, what gets you the gain of dominion almost. Not domination, but the kingdom of the earth is yours. You will inherit it. Mourning is what brings you comfort. These are all opposites of the ways that we want to have dominion, which is to have control over people or have big ministries, or it's just so different. It's almost hard to believe that that system even works. But this is what Jesus came to show us. And so, and you can look at the Magnificat of Mary. You can look at so many other places in Scripture where Jesus shows us that his way of dominion is not natural and is not what we have learned through time and history. But we can, when we do as Mary did, which was sit at his feet in humbleness and quietness. And this is the only way we can relearn, and the only way we can learn to stop abusing each other and our earth. And I have here a tomato that I bought at the farmer's market today as just a symbol of what it's supposed to be like, what the fruit of true dominion is. It smells of the earth. It's fresh. It's been allowed to ripen in its right time, and it sustains, and it has vitamins and energy for us. What God wants is not to steal anything from us or to hold us under his thumb. And he doesn't want us to do the same to each other either. So we have to unlearn the domination that has become so internal in us. And Jesus is the only way I know of to figure out that path. Jesus is the true Lord, and he shows us how to do that as well.
Beautiful, Annie. Thank you for your reflections and your time. Yeah, really stellar. Thought-provoking, much to think through there. I think we're all looking forward to your thesis and reading that. But yeah, really appreciate you and appreciate your time and input. We're going to take a short break between our reflections before I hand it over to Susan Wagner. And I'm going to invite SSU's president, Dr. Brad Jerzak, just to share for a few minutes a little bit about the university and who we are as an institution and a community. And so, Brad, I think you're here. I can see you.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Hi.
Brad, I'll give you a few minutes. Thank you for being with us as well.
Thank you. And I'll only need a few minutes. Most of you are familiar to the school. Where we're at right now, as many of you know, is that we're running 3 departments at a graduate studies level. So we've got theology and culture represented today by Annie Abernathy. That was just a marvelous talk. Thank you. And I do commend her thesis for further reading. It's just excellent. We've also got the Jim Forrest Institute for Religion, Peace, and Justice, and we'll be hearing from Susanna shortly, who I just saw at the residency out in Abbotsford. And then we've got the Reconciliation Studies Department that is in the midst of getting traction as we're trying to move forward with that. And we'll have fall activities. One of the great things that I see happening across those 3 departments is this idea of building bridges, or rather maybe nurturing, flourishing bridge builders, bridging people. And so the way I see it is that, especially around the culture wars stuff, left and right, progressive, conservative, and all of that, we've developed a table at the Theology and Culture Department where people are exposed to diverse views and learn to hold difference with respect. And what happens there is quite remarkable. I'll come back to that in a moment in a general way. With Jim Forrest, we have the same, but we also have this very interesting aspect going on around multi-faith conversation and hospitality. And so while we're a Christian faith-based college, in our charter, we also have guest lecturers who are people of other faiths who really contribute to what we're doing. Our friend Safi Kaskas, a Muslim, Mark Braverman, a Jew, and then others that are part of our guest lectures and readings. And then with the reconciliation studies, it's more about crossing bridges together with Indigenous peoples into a new space of decolonized faith, and that nonetheless strongly affirms their spirituality rather than sort of what happened with the colonizers, Christian and progressive, from Europe, who just thought they were superstitious and backwards. And we're trying to actively repent. So all of these things are making me enthusiastic, and especially also then developing a relationship with alumni. I suppose today is a good example of how these conversations quickly turn into think tanks, and our students quickly become practitioners in the real world. And I'm just so very proud of them and that they would hold this conference today. Well done, everyone. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad. So good to see your face, mate. Okay, well, we're going to keep moving forward. And so I'm excited to invite Susanna Wagner to be with us. And Susanna is a student and master's student in the Jim Forrest Institute, studying peace and justice. And yeah, welcome your reflections. Thanks for being with us. You got to unmute, darling.
Sorry, here I am. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm speaking to you from the seized territory of the Ino, Tutelo, Saponi, and Occaneechi, and the Shakori peoples. The message of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation, an umbrella title for most of the tribes in this area, would like everyone to know that this land does not belong to man. We belong to the land. The Occaneechi people, the Yisa, ask that you will keep these thoughts in mind and treat the earth with the respect, love, and care that their ancestors did, and as they still do today. I'm a white settler American with a Christian background. I'm not sure where each member here is from, but I would dare to say those of you with a Western background like me have been greatly influenced by Christian theology. I'm essentially going to read you a paper I recently wrote about Christian theology and the part it has played and is playing in the current environmental crisis, and share some ideas of ways we can bring about a change of mind. If at the end you would like to see some of my sources or would like to read an extended version of this paper, please let me know in the chat. In the ancient Hebrew scriptures, we find the verse, "Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. That's Genesis 1:26. Christian theology is formed around this verse, birthing the idea that humans are to have dominion over the rest of nature and get to use their power in ways that benefit them regardless of how it affects more than human nature. Popular evangelical websites reveal that creation care and stewardship of the earth are popular topics. However, the emphasis is often on the separation between humans and animals, or humans and more than human nature. Wayne Grudem's systematic theology spends page after page detailing the ways humans are morally, spiritually, mentally, relationally, and physically superior to animals. Because we are made in God's image, the assumption being that the animals are not. There are other Christian perspectives besides the evangelical one, of course. Saint Dionysius, the Orthodox church father of the 5th or 6th century, coined the word hierarchy and related it to nature. He did not mean domination when using the word hierarchy, but rather that all things can be found in God, and God in things at their appropriate level. In other words, nothing can be seen as simply an object for our selfish use, but should be seen as sacred. The Orthodox perspective that developed over time is that the very presence of all of creation is to point humans to God. Thus, it still centers humans, but does not encourage humans to treat more than human nature as subservient and powerless to us. We must look elsewhere to find more healing belief systems for ourselves and for the rest of nature. Some helpful places to look are at ancient, indigenous, and scientific views of nature. We can also find a lot of value in some of the Christian perspectives that push back on the dominionistic theology I have already mentioned. One place we can find ancient perspectives on nature is in Chinese poetry. In this poetry, we find a complex relationship between human and more than human nature. The mystery held by more than human nature led to the belief that nature is alive with spirits or souls. More than human nature was personified and respected as an equal or as more powerful than humans. Historians believe more than human nature is the original object of religion. Indigenous perspectives are not a monolith, but it is very important that Indigenous perspectives are sought out and consulted in order to realign Christian theology for the good of the whole earth. An Indigenous perspective at baseline exposes the unequal impact that climate change has on marginalized people and the intersections between climate change, environmental decline, racism, and social injustice. The response that Indigenous people carry the respect that Indigenous people carry for all of nature and seek to pass down to their children should be fiercely protected and shared with the broader culture. Thankfully, there is a growing recognition that Indigenous perspectives be in the forefront of the climate crisis response. Tuning into a more science-based perspective can also help Christians and those affected by Christian theology rethink their relationship to the environment. Science has told us since Darwin that humans are animals, but we and even the scientific world have resisted this. The bulk of scientific data in the past few decades have pointed to the significance of our animality to how we act and make decisions. It is not as easy as we once thought to explain how we act based on what our mind is doing in opposition to our sensual, physical, and experiential parts. We are animals and should rethink how we treat the rest of the animal world based on a new, equal value system. A contemporary Catholic theologian, Eric Darrell Mayer, argues that there must be a fundamental shift in our understanding of ourselves as we relate to nature beyond ourselves and other creatures. His work investigates why Christianity has been a force for effective resistance to environmental decline and violence. His conclusion is that Christian theology is so invested in a clear distinction between animals and humans that Christians cannot see where we creatures are enmeshed and therefore do not resist the demise of the environment. He argues that until Christian theology releases itself from this commitment to the separation of human and animal and centers itself on human animality and even considers the animality of God, any efforts to help the environment will be ineffective and harmful. Amina Alatas Bradford, an eco-womanist who works at the intersection of science, faith, and race, argues that Christians have even scapegoated the smallest of the animals, the microbe, the germ, as a way of explaining why there's pain in the world, even in the presence of a loving, all-powerful God. This idea takes the separation that Christian theology has created between humans and animals to the very minutiae of everyday life. She sees theologians turning toward the study of the microbe as a way of disrupting the prevailing and long-standing anthropocentric way of viewing our relationship to anything non-human. Alatas Bradford suggests that humanity's complete dependence on microbes counters the age-old Christian theology that uses the image of God language as the primary psychological wedge between humanity and its responsibility to animal and environmental life. Anyone following science or politics today knows the crisis at hand. We have come to the end of 10,000 years of climate stability and are in a human-induced climate crisis. With the shift in global temperature, we are seeing extreme weather, such as droughts, hurricanes, heat waves, and drier conditions that cause fires and floods. Sea levels are rising, ice caps are melting, and rainforests are being destroyed. What can we as Christians and those influenced by Christian theology do about it? Where our belief systems have led us to commit ecological violence, we should change those belief systems. In closing, I would like to share the ideas of Kaimana Barkasi. Barkasi is a Hawaiian who uses his many talents and community roles to improve the well-being of Hawaiians through a healthy community ecosystem. His desire is to help maintain the rich indigenous perspectives of his people. He defines the indigenous perspective as backwards, archaic, and simplistic. By backwards, he means that it is an interdependent way of coexisting with more than nature, more than human nature. It is an existence that is neither invasive nor destructive. The indigenous perspective is archaic in the sense that it is tried and tested over centuries. He does not understand why lack of progress is so terrible when he sees where progress has brought our environment. By simplistic, he means it is uncomplicated and sure. He has seen these indigenous perspectives used to revitalize the island of Huahin and the nation of Tahiti. The island, once stripped of its natural resources due to overfishing, harvesting, and gathering, has been restored in a few years to its original abundance using the ancient indigenous practices of hunting, gathering, and growing. Two Hawaiian sayings are, "The land is the chief, and man is but his servant," and "If the land lives, so shall we." Thank you.
Absolutely gorgeous, Susanna. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, the brain is spinning. So much to say, but just so moved by your talk. Thank you so much. We are gonna invite our final contributor for the evening, Joey Ager, in just a second. Just to say, once he finishes, we'll take a short break together, just so people can stretch their legs, grab another coffee, or do some stretching. And we'll take 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll come back together, and we'll have some time first again for our panelists to have conversations together, and then we'll open it up to some conversation collectively as we kind of wind down our afternoon, evening together. So, Joey, excited to have you in the mosaic of conversation tonight. I don't know if you all are having fun. I'm having lots of fun. Joey, welcome you to come and bring your voice and perspective and space to this conversation as well. Thank you for your time, mate.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for the invitation. Hi, everyone. It's great to be together. Also want to say thank you, Susanna, for what you shared. Really powerful and moving, and a lot to think about. And I'm really eager to get into some of the connections around what we're sharing as well. So yeah, I'm Joey. I'm here in the Pacific Northwest, in Tacoma, in Washington. I'm here on land that's been stewarded since the beginning of time by the Puyallup people of the Coast Salish Nation. And I do a lot of work with institutions, with Protestant Christian institutions here in this area. I work with the Lutheran Church, but do a lot of work with Methodist and Episcopalian and Presbyterian and others. And my background is in community organizing, faith-rooted community organizing, and we have a project here called Design for Peace, which is about gathering these congregations that are often stewarding spaces, physical spaces, to be together in community with one another and to dig deep in their communities to discern how they might use those spaces. But really at the heart of that work is transformation of institutions, the hope, the foolish hope, perhaps, that's all we have sometimes, of the transformation of institutions for local meaning, local relationships and accountability, and the institutions can focus on justice and the meaning of what they're called to in their communities. And so we have a vision, a hope that our institutions serve our neighbors deeply. What I want to reflect on is really the sense that this theme, this idea of unlearning dominion, is at the heart of this practice, is the heart of the question of rethinking or transforming, hopefully transforming institutions. And I want to acknowledge in a way we have a challenge with language here in this whole conversation, that in many ways, I think a few of us are saying that dominion has become largely indistinguishable from domination, that the practical implications of a theology of dominion as domination, the idea of humanity as the created, the dominant, the defining force, the meaning of creation, and that creation that exists to serve us, that idea, I really see as at the heart of so many of the challenges that we're facing locally and certainly globally. The climate crisis, Susanna mentioned much of the detail of that. This lies at the heart of that. This is a theological question, a spiritual question. A lot of our work here is about housing and belonging, the crisis of the lack of adequate housing and belonging in community, political conflict, institutional decline itself. We see this spirituality of dominion really at the heart of this. And our institutions, which are declining, are looking for a path to renewal. And really the question I find myself asking as I listen to my friends here is like, do we redefine, do we reclaim this word that has come to mean all this? Or do we say, no, we just need to find another way of describing our identity and our relationship with creation? It's just too much baggage. So one of the strategies that we use here locally that I want to share a little bit of reflection around in thinking about the renewal work, the transformation work of institutions, particularly as it relates to unlearning dominion, is the strategy of biomimicry, imitation of creation, imitation of nature. So this is a word I learned first from Adrienne Marie Bryan, a wonderful writer who wrote Emergent Strategy and some other books. And biomimicry simply means learning from nature and applying the lessons we learn there to human organizations, to human life, to human systems. It's also a recognition that we are mimetic. Some of us are interested in René Girard and curious about the idea that humans are in some way fundamentally mimetic. We imitate what we see. And I think neuroscience is teaching us that in many ways parts of our brains are wired to imitate. But the question is not, do we imitate or how do we learn through imitation? It's really, what do we imitate? Who do we imitate? And the question of biomimicry says we want to look at creation as a teacher, and we want to engage in the work of imitation. And I think it's important to say here that this doesn't mean appropriating something that's essentially other, but actually it recognizes our essential belonging, our identity within ecology. I sometimes get sort of think it's funny in these conversations, we go like, well, let's use an ecological metaphor here. Let's think about soil as a metaphor or the trees as a metaphor. And I feel actually that's not a metaphor at all. Society is ecological, is empirically ecological because we are ecological. The thing that is a metaphor, I think, the metaphor that masquerades as a reality is the market, is capitalism. That's a metaphor. That's not an empirical reality. That's a human story. But we are ecology. And so let's look to ecology to learn. And let's not do so in an overly romantic way or in a scientific way. Some of the work of Murray Bookchin and others takes nature very seriously and scientifically. And Susanna, I heard you say that too. He talks about dialectical naturalism as a tradition that says we can learn empirically about nature, and then therefore we can learn about our anthropology and perhaps even our politics or our theology rooted in that exploration of nature. So we imitate nature because we are nature, because we are ecology. And when we pay attention there, we can allow our anthropology, we can allow our theology to emerge from that reality. Incidentally, I'm from Edinburgh. I'm from Scotland originally, but live here on the West Coast. And this is the way that I was taught in an Episcopal church that was really shaped by Celtic Christianity, that we sometimes call nature the other book, the second book, that we learn about the Creator from the creation. Okay, so what does this tell us about unlearning dominion? Well, I want to focus on, just for a couple of minutes, one of the key insights that I think we're learning in this practice of biomimicry about unlearning dominion. And that is that at the root of humanity's malpractice of dominion is the denial of death. I'll say that again. At the root of humanity's malpractice of dominion is the denial of death. There's an amazing book called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker, who argues that our fear and denial of death is at the root of industrial culture, the root of our society, that we have to tell these heroic systems of escaping death because we're so terrified and in denial of it. And the curiosity here is, without recovering an anthropology or a theology, and even a politics that radically reshapes our relationship between humanity and death, I think that we will continue to suffer the real consequences of this denial. The climate crisis, the belonging crisis, the crisis in community. And again, just returning to Bookchin here, he argues that really a rigorous scientific view of nature points us to a rejection of hierarchy. In fact, that this story that we deny death, we can be in control, we can be on the top, we are the top of the hierarchy, is not an empirical truth in our study of nature. And it certainly doesn't help us to build the kind of world that we need. So I want to share an image on the screen just for a couple of minutes. And can someone give me a thumbs up if they're able to see this image? Is it readable? Yeah, okay, perfect. So this is an image that we use a lot in our work, and it actually comes out of organizational development theory. And there's an institute called the Berkana Institute that was started by Margaret Wheatley and some others. And this is just a simple way of describing how change happens in organizations. But what I think is really helpful here is that this is really a biomimetic model that we can apply to church life, to political life, to our individual life, families and relationships. And we do this really concretely a lot. So I'll just describe the image really quickly, and then I want to look at it with 3 different lenses. So it's fairly obvious what it means, but in a simple way, what this image says, what this model says, is that there's a process of change moving from the left to the right of the screen is sort of the movement of time, and that systems, organizations grow up and are planted and emerge and are stabilized, and then they always become heavy. They always become too heavy for themselves often, or the situation changes and they begin to decline. And there's this natural arc of the process of an organization's life. And what this model shows is that at the same time that that's happening, there are often other things in the same place, in that same community, where new practices are being experimented with, and they're often disconnected. But when they get connected, they start to emerge. And this sort of midwives, my wife's a midwife, so I like this part of the story. Midwives help this to emerge, and it becomes the emergent system. And this model suggests that this sort of equilibrium, it's very natural, and it happens in all organizations in one way or another. So I want to look at this with 3 lenses. One is an ecological lens. The second is an institutional one, and the third is a theological lens. And then I'll wrap up. So first, let's think ecologically. Let's imagine we're looking at this image and we're trying to describe the corner of a forest. So I'm here in the Northwest, so it's easy to just imagine this as a sort of lush green forest. So let's imagine that this light green arc is the story of a great big tree like a cedar, and that the cedar grew and emerged from a seed, and then it became stable and it had a life. It supported others as well. And then it became too heavy for its own roots to sustain. And maybe it was a storm, or maybe it was just time, but it began to fall, and one day it fell to the forest floor. And at the same time as that, there were seeds all around in the soil, which were germinating or which were dormant and waiting for their time. And when this great big tree falls, it of course decomposes, and its resources are redistributed to that corner of the forest and feed the emergence of a new system, a new tree. And what it's important, I think, to mention that the thing that replaces the thing that ended is not the same. Like a cedar might fall and a spruce might come in its place. It's not a one-to-one transition. So in fact, we can speak very clearly of death in this cycle. Death is fundamental to the integrity of this system. The big tree needs to die, needs to decompose for the emergence of the new. So that's an ecological way of thinking about this. An institutional way is that, this is the way that we apply this regularly with congregations and organizations, is that the dominion story, or the dominion as domination story, I would call it the capitalist story, tells us that we start something and then it should keep going forever and grow stably. And if it doesn't do that, then you're failing. That the economy needs to grow every year, the GDP needs to increase. And if it doesn't, then we're in a recession. That's the domination story. And yet healthy organizations recognize that this same arc is true for them, that there are 120-year-old churches in my city who are asking the question, what do we need to allow to be hospice? What do we need to allow to decompose and to let go of? And we can talk very clearly about death. We allow it to die so that new things can emerge. And it's only when that releasing, that ability to confront the denial of death happens, it's only when that happens that new things are possible to emerge. So here again, death is fundamental to the integrity of this system. Let's think theologically for a second as well. I'll be curious what comes up for you all as we go into our question time. But one of the observations here theologically is that this system only makes sense in the context of collective well-being. If you only look at this system as an individual, then we just go into a panic mode and say, how do I get back to stability? How do I get back to the time when I was at the height of my arc? And yet, if we look at this in the context of a community where we care about the well-being of others, then there are things that die. There are things, even individuals, that die that can be part of the well-being of the whole. Another way of looking at this theologically might be to say the kingdom of God emerges now, here and now, on earth as it is in heaven, when empire and rivalry and violence die. When we release and allow these to die, only then can a new kingdom be born here and now. This is a baptismal journey, incidentally. Only when a seed falls to the ground, right? So we go into the water and we come up emerging in a new system. This model also invites us to think about control differently, that when we're part of a dominant system that needs to allow itself to die or go into a hospice time, we really have to embrace emergence and trust that Spirit's ahead of us, that we cannot guarantee that the system which replaces what we're allowing to die will look anything like what we want it to look like. We have to trust the Spirit's action in that space. Here again, friends, death, dying, releasing is fundamental to the integrity of the system. So what does this biomimetic model have to say about unlearning dominion? I wonder whether the fear of denial of death, the fear and denial of death, is a primary characteristic and a driver of our malpractice of dominion, that our dominion is sustained in denial of death. And to unlearn this, we have to come to see that truly death has lost its sting, not solely in the world to come, but here and right now. And we can then embrace all sacred decomposition that leads to the emergence of peace among us. Thanks, friends.
Gorgeous, Joey. Absolutely gorgeous. Cool. Okay, as promised, we'll take we'll just we'll let that ruminate and take let's call it a 2-minute break. I'll call us back together again. So feel free to jump up or do what you need to do, and we'll gather back together in 2 minutes time. Okay, we're going to gather back together as people are coming back. There's Chris, Susanna, welcome back. Not sure if Joey, you're back yet. I just want to say again, thank you to everybody who's here, giving your time and energy to hang out with us. For the last about 20-30 minutes we have together, we're going to do two things. So first, I wanted to create some space for our panelist friends to dialogue together now that we've shared those kind of 4 reflections. And then afterwards, we'll have some time for some collective dialogue. So if there's questions that emerge or questions that you have for anybody individually, or some comments that you might want to throw into this conversation around Unlearning Dominion, then yeah, we'll create some space for that as well. So I'm going to let the 4 of you ask each other questions, but I'll start things off just by asking a question that I think, well, I don't know. I have a question around control. I mean, I think something that cuts through all of your chats. So whether we're talking about community or church or politics or ecology or a relationship to whatever, this question of control, of this eternal drive. And Joey, I know that you tried to give some diagnostics to that, which I think is really valuable in the question of the denial of death, right? But in each of the different kind of spheres that we're talking about, unlearning dominion, which the more that I think about it in relation to everything you all are bringing, I mean, to me, it's the very invitation of conversion itself. Like, it is like, it's gospel, right? This is the whole thing. It's like we're like, yeah, it's so interesting to me why that church communities often, I think, are almost the worst at this. But yeah, so this invites you to reflect a bit on the nature of control and what is that and why is that and what is that internalized thing, whether it's in communities, in the way that we relate to ecology. Why do we control? Like what does that do and what does that produce? Yeah, invite you guys to share a bit about that, or add some more reflection on that. Love does not control.
Ooh, and he's holding up a book. That looks good. I hear a lot of people talking about how insecure and anxious they are at the moment. I don't know about other people. And I'm in my 30s, and I occasionally talk to people who are older than me who are like, "Oh, it's always been like this." And then I hear other people say, "No, like this is an anxious time. This is an insecure time." The reason I start there is like I wonder whether like our desire for control is proportionate to our desire to not feel like the world is really scary and out of our, just out of our control, and we can't guarantee our kids are going to be safe. We can't guarantee we're going to be safe. And one of the classes we've been doing is around trauma and some of the neuroscience and things there. And I'm curious, trying to learn more about that. That's not an area I know a lot around. But one thing I picked up in that class is like this very fundamental human desire to feel safe. And I wonder whether the more uncontrolled the world sometimes seems, the more we have a heightened desire to feel in control. So I'm curious about the connection between that and the theology. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't this why we often find evangelicals needing desperately to say God is in control? Because control drives away our fear. And we think that's the only thing that can drive away our fear, is knowing that someone's in control or we're in control. But love is something different, because love doesn't control, but it can provide the same security if we allow it.
Mm. So is the pursuit of control like a substantive replacement for something better? And like, is that what we're kind of coming to with that? Like, are we trying to shortcut something that's just too difficult? Because my other question was kind of like, as we talk about dominion, domination, all of that, and like, I appreciate your question, Joanne, whether or not the word just should get chucked out or not. I tend to be somebody who likes to hold on and want to kind of turn it around and turn the diamond until it finds its meaning again. But like the other question kind of floating in my brain the whole time was just like why we can talk about this so eloquently, and Chris, like you're unpacking this experience about in a community context, right? And I know many of us have lived in community spaces. I lived at the Catholic Worker for a while, and it's like even in our most anarchic, Christocentric communal spaces, my question is just like, why are we so rubbish at this? Like, we're really bad at it.
We are really bad. And I mean, reflecting again on that experience, which goes back a few decades now, we were trying so hard not to have anybody in control. We didn't want a pastor. We didn't want the traditional structures. We tried really hard to do something fresh and new. And you used the phrase Christocentric, and that was our aim. I think the reality was we fell far short. And so I think my perspective now is thinking not so much why did it happen and can we analyze the causes. We can get so far with that sort of discussion, but I think some of you guys are going to be better at it than me. My perspective is more, how do we remedy the damage? How do we help people therapeutically? And how do we avoid falling into it again? And I think there are a few safeguards we can have in place, but we've just got to recognize that it's about becoming more like Jesus. I think Virginia put some great comments into the chat, pointing out the connection with the Beatitudes and the Christ hymn, Philippians 2, Jesus doing the opposite of domination.
Can I add something here? I'm curious, in the chat, there's some connections with technology, and I know folks know this idea of appropriate technology. There's like, in the argument around technology, it's not a binary choice. Do we yes technology or no technology? We say, no, we need appropriate technology. So we were forced to ask, what's the technology that's appropriate to the task or the vision or the outcome? And I wonder if the same thing's true of control. It's not like we should be in control or we should be out, or control is bad. It's like the AA prayer. It's like, help me to know the things I can control and the things I can't control. And I wonder whether that's more the focus of where our conversation should be, is like, clearly humans try to control everything, and that is clearly too big. So what does it mean to say, I'm only going to embrace the thing, I'm only going to take responsibility for the things I can control, and that's going to be good, that's going to be sacred and important. And I'm not going to try and control beyond that. So maybe the real question is, where's the line?
I think it's interesting, if we look at the life of Christ, that other than the centurion's child, he didn't heal anyone from a distance or outside of time necessarily. Is that accurate? And we think of even his 3-year ministry, like, that had an ending point, that had, like, could he have sustained that kind of ministry for longer? Would we have even accepted it? So again, this acceptance of death, of even good things, as inevitable, and that Jesus didn't try to control the entire universe during his, obviously he was everything lives and moves and has its being through him, but he didn't. Yeah, somebody else carry that. I think you know what I'm saying.
I know I only read a poem, but can I jump in?
Please, Eric.
I think this issue of control, and it's not a West-East thing, it's a human thing. We are hell-bent on certainty, and we've become a world where the obsession with certainty is so fundamental to our sense of security. And what we've lost theologically largely is this comfort with mystery. And I think that is such an important thing. Like, I'm learning, I mean, in Orthodoxy, you learn to become comfortable with mystery and to affirm it, and to be comfortable with not knowing everything, and coming to that point where you say, even things about God, it's like, I don't understand God completely. There's a mystery there, and the mystery is okay. And actually, the mystery is beautiful. So it's not even just becoming comfortable. It's actually receiving it in an intuitive way. And I think that, going back to this ecological connection, I just love this language. Nature itself contains this element of mystery. When I'm hiking deep in the woods, I connect with nature in a mysterious way that I can try and articulate, but it will fall short of that experience. And so I think that even on a multi-faith level, we need this return to being okay with uncertainty, being okay with mystery, and sitting with it and embracing it, and not treating it like an enemy that has to be overcome. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, this is just a small thought in relation to this, is one of my new sort of mantras is move towards complexity. And I think that's the work of moving away from control and moving away from certainty. We as humans just love to keep things simple, and we don't like to think about complexity, but that's something that came up in the residency I was in recently with SSU. And I just keep thinking about is move towards complexity. And certainly in the ecological things I'm thinking through, there are no simple answers. And even the framework that I'm proposing of sort of more of an equality viewpoint between humans and more than human nature, that's not a simple thing. That's a very complex thing. So moving towards complexity.
Yeah. All right, with our last about 10, 15 minutes, since we're opening up this conversation already, I want to invite all of you, anybody who has questions or thoughts to add, questions for our panelists, whether it's about what we're speaking about right now or anything else that is kind of percolating from the time that we've shared together. I'll open it up, so feel free to unmute yourself, ask a question. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciated all those thoughts. I was recently up on the Mount of Temptations, and I couldn't help but think, why didn't you just take control of everything? Like seeing all the injustice that's happening, it's sort of like, why wouldn't you just like set everything right? And sort of in your thoughts, I've just been kind of thinking about sort of this natural cycle that you were kind of talking about of life and death. And it seems a little bit like in our clinging to life and empire and control, we've sort of neglected the work of planting seeds for the future. And the longer it goes, the further and further we get removed, and it's sort of like in desperation we're sort of clinging to the rotten fruit that's remaining, because it's like, well, what do? We haven't planted seeds for so long. And so I sort of wonder, in this metaphor, what your thoughts on what are the seeds that we could be planting today? What are the seeds already planted that we could be cultivating today? And what are the things that we need to be chopping down today? And is it possible to do this without taking control and ourselves?
Can I respond to that really fast? Is that okay?
Yeah, do it.
Do you mind? Thank you, Ben. That's beautiful. And are you on the Camino? Is that right, Ben? Yeah, beautiful, amazing, blessing to you. Yeah, I think that's an amazing question. I was talking to someone who works in the Puyallup tribe, the indigenous community here in Tacoma recently. We're talking about gardening, like we both grow garden and things. And he made a sort of a comment that in the Northwest, it's probably not true everywhere, but in the Northwest, there's just so much growing all the time that if you want something to grow, you need to like make space, and something's going to come through, because the seeds are like the seeds are there already. And so the work is to make space, not to like, put something in there. And that, for me, that feels really connected to like the decolonizing of the parable of the sower. That like, where the church is not like the one with the bag of seeds, and we have the word and we're spreading it, but like the seed's everywhere. The seed of peace is everywhere at all times. And I think our work, like the parable of the sower suggests, is, are we making this? Are we composting the soil? Are we like clearing this? Are we taking responsibility to make the space that allows the seed to grow? So not disagreeing with your question at all. I find myself asking more like, how do we create the conditions so that the seeds of peace, which are everywhere, can grow, rather than what is the seed that I want to plant?
I think I could add to that. Like, I think this is also very true in the context of organizing and justice work. In that, I think one of the great tasks of organizing and justice work is aligning ourselves to, first of all, histories, communities, spaces, aunties, uncles, recognizing that we don't emerge from nowhere, right? We emerge from this cyclical process of peace and peacemaking, right? And so finding the voices before and taking care of the ones who are coming after. So I think you could also think about that question of what seeds are we inheriting and what seeds are we moving forward, by recognizing that we, that the arc of justice doesn't rest upon our shoulders, but rests upon a collective movement that continues to move through the world. And the parts that we play within that means that we need to become as acquainted as we can with the great, just with the movement that's flowed before us. And for those of us who are also starting to get grayer hair, and who've been in the process of, pursuing justice and doing justice work for decades, it is a process of starting to think about how do we, as I know, Joey, you mentioned so much, how do we learn how to let go? And how do we learn how to create room? And how do we learn how to give, how to intentionally begin to mentor, give value to those who are stepping in after us, So I think in those contexts that works well too. Joshua, I see you have a question.
Well, more of kind of a comment and reflection on some. So, Joshua hopping. I'm a Jalagi or Cherokee Nation Alma tribal member. And as I'm thinking and listening to this one of the things that's kind of been helping me was within our tribe, we have this concept of kohi, of balance to harmony. And it's really this sense that even all things around us are to be in balance and harmony and relationship with each other. And that kind of helps you remember not to be dominant or taken over it, because you really have this sense of working together with not only each other, but also with the earth and the animals and our non-human relatives. And I think that's something, and with that has that mark of humility that comes into play that I think is really important, of dialing it back and changing that perspective on things. And it is definitely hard to continue in there because, obviously the dominant culture is trying to pull us in a different way. But I think there's a lot to be done with that one, and being able to really kind of sit in there. And I know some of the speakers were kind of pulling and learning from the Indigenous brothers and sisters. So thank you, Wado, from that side. But being able to really pull that and then stay in that sense of harmony, I think, is key.
Thank you, Joshua. I think we have time for maybe one more question, one more thought before we kind of call it a day. So if there's anybody with a burning question or thought to add to the equation, now's time.
I just wanted to share something that I lost access to all my notes during this presentation, so there's a lot of stuff that I didn't say that I wanted to, but I don't know. I think in training on trauma as a therapist several years ago, came across this quote and didn't realize that this was from a feminist ecologist, or I don't know which way you put where you put the adjective, but Sally McFaig. Is anybody familiar with her? And she said, all of the earth is in trauma response. And the more I think about that, the more I feel like that encompasses what has happened in our learning of domination, is that now everyone is in trauma response. Everything we do comes from a place of trying to regain control, trying to get our breath back, trying to calm our fears, trying to, and the earth is constantly roiling and gasping for its own autonomy, and we're constantly trying to control. And so yeah, we need to, all of these things that seem like negatives, dominion or death or whatever else, we need to find that balance, because if we are Christians and believe in the redemptive work of Jesus, we know that everything is resurrected, everything is restored. So we both need to walk with humility, recognizing that we're all dealing with a broken system that is traumatized. So we need to treat each of each other with kindness and the earth in the same way. And that's the only way we can unlearn the system that we've created that is failing us in every situation. Relationships, governments, nations, earth, all of it.
You know, Annie, I think that's a really powerful closing word. Appreciate you. Eric, I'm going to invite you, if you're okay, to read your poem to us one more time as we kind of close this time out together. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. All right. So before you do, because I think we'll just end with your poem again. We'll let that be the final thing spoken. So I just want to say a major thank you to all of you for spending this time with us from all over the world. Looks like we have friends from a bunch of different countries and spaces. Also, a huge thank you to Eric, Joey, Chris, Susanna, and Annie for your work in organizing this time and for your thoughts and perspectives. It's beautiful. Thanks, Brad, for jumping in and being with us too. And just on behalf of SSU, thank you all for your time and energy. Our coursework is always open to you in any way, shape, or form. If there's a yearning inside of you to dig deeper in some capacity in some of these topics or conversations, you can find all of our courses and programs and different things online at ssu.ca. You're all more than welcome. So Eric, I'll hand it to you, and we'll just kind of, I don't know, I think a good way to recognize how these dominating forces are both in the world and shot through us all at the same time. And I think constantly being aware that, that as Dorothy Day would say, that dirty, rotten system, which infects all of us, is in a process of redemption inside of all of us as well. And so, Eric, I just want to invite you to close us out with your thoughts again. So thank you all for being with us, and we'll let Eric finish, and then we'll call it a day.
Okay. Before the long shadow, when living trees once crowned the wide and sacred horizon, when clear rivers bordered fields of tall, golden grass, where the hands of Adam sowed life in life-giving soil, where Eve danced with lions, where lamb sat with leopard, we did not walk as ruthless kings, we did not rule as bitter queens. Even wandering in the arid paths of this burnt and broken land, we are intertwined, like long coiling knots of vines. Yet our thorns are not eternal. In the dark valley, withering cities sprawl. Wolves roam and howl empire's dissonant song. They hunt the scent of power. Ascending 7 hills, they circle and claw at the moon. They can only fail. They can only rage in exhaustion. This is when the hunt cuts them and bleeds the others. And all the earth suffers. There is a dawn, a sunlit moment that speaks. Oh, stand in deep silence. Bend your swords until they break. Bow your heads and listen. Do not choke the world. Adam, Eve, tend this garden.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day.
Thanks, friends.